Their first son, Andrew Carnegie, was born on a bleak day in November 1835. His hypomanic impatience was evident almost from birth. His aunts recalled that as an infant, he preferred to have two spoons going at once. Will carved out a life of working-class opulence in Dunfermline. When Andrew was a baby, the family moved to a bigger house because Will needed room to expand his business. He bought new looms, took on apprentices, and dedicated the ground floor to production, while the family lived upstairs in accommodations that seemed spacious compared to the house they had moved from. Young Andrew's ambition was to become a great weaver like his father, his first hero. Carnegie also drank in colorful stories of Scotland's historic heroes told by his uncle Lauder, who owned a small store on High Street where Andrew and his cousin Dodd spent much of their time. William Wallace, the Scottish freedom fighter known to most Americans through the movie Braveheart, topped his pantheon. Wallace, who emerged from obscurity to lead a rebellion against the English king Edward I in 1297, was anointed guardian of Scotland and ruled the country briefly before being decapitated by the king's men. Wallace, of course, was our hero. Everything heroic centered in him. Wallace played much the same psychological function for Carnegie as Caesar had for Hamilton, forming the core of a grandiose self-image. If the source of my stock of that prime article, courage, were studied, I am sure the final analysis would find it founded on Wallace, the hero of Scotland. It is a tower of strength for a boy to have a hero, Carnegie wrote. Of course, it is perfectly natural for young boys to have heroes, but Carnegie's identification with Wallace was so intense that it became a guide for his actions for the rest of his life. When faced with a difficult situation, he wrote, "I was not beyond asking myself what Wallace would have done. A real disciple of Wallace or Bruce could not give up. He would die first." Though Will Carnegie was a believer in political change, he could not adapt to technological change. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain with the introduction of steam-powered looms. By 1835, there were more than 110,000 power looms in Britain, mostly dedicated to the manufacture of cotton sheets and textiles. Cotton, once a luxury fabric like silk, could now be manufactured inexpensively. This increase in efficiency put cotton hand weavers out of business. Will Carnegie didn't believe the same thing could happen to him and the other skilled craftsmen who made the linen. He was wrong. The jacquard loom, which could be programmed with punch cards to make intricate designs, was invented in 1825. Their speed transformed damask linen from an expensive work of art into a cheap commodity too. There are more than 84,560 hand-loom linen weavers in Scotland in 1840 and only 25,000 by 1850. Eventually they would become extinct. The change from hand-loom to steam-loom weaving was disastrous to our family. My father did not recognize the impending revolution. Carnegie recalled, for a period of time, buyers still purchased Will Carnegie's linen, but increasingly they expected to pay steam loom rates. The price the market would bear spiraled downward, and so did the fortunes of Will Carnegie and his family. Shortly after this, I began to learn what poverty meant. One day in the winter of 1847, Will Carnegie returned from a fruitless sail trip and announced quietly to his son Andra, "I can get nae mair work." This moment shaped the course of Andrew Carnegie's life. He saw his proud family plummeting into poverty, and his father could do nothing to stop it. Then and there came the resolve that I would cure that when I became a man. Will's moment of humiliation became Carnegie's moment of determination. The mission toward which Carnegie would direct his hypomanic energies was set. The entire community of Dunfermline weavers was eventually put out of work by the steam loom. In 1847, after a bubble in railroad stocks burst, a market panic sank the entire British economy into depression and produced massive unemployment. The potato famine in Ireland brought the more ominous risk of starvation. Between 1845 and 1850, 1,300,000 people left the British Isles for America. Like so many others in 1848, the Carnegies decided to see if their luck would be any better in America. Notably, it was Margaret who made the decision. They sold their furniture at auction for nearly nothing. Will's precious hand loom, which he had once played like a musical instrument, sold for no more than the price of the wood. The proceeds of the sale were most disappointing, remembered Carnegie. Only the charity of a family friend gave them the final £20 they needed to pay for their passage. The night before the family set sail, Will's sister found him sitting alone in the dark in his empty cottage with his head in his hand. His attitude was very sad, she said. The 43-year-old master weaver had become a tired and defeated man, sinking into a depression from which he would never emerge. America would prove to be the final chapter in his personal tragedy, the end of the catastrophe. But for his son Andrew, America was the beginning of an epic adventure. Eager young man in a vital young land. Andrew watched, heartbroken, with tearful eyes, as the spire of the Dunfermline Abbey faded into the distance. He vowed to return some day. Though still in mourning for the loss of his home, Andrew adapted to the new world with extraordinary speed and enthusiasm. For most, the ocean crossing was an ordeal of anxiety and discomfort, but to Andrew it was fun. The boat excited him, and he peppered the sailors with constant questions. Within 24 hours, the small tow-haired boy was the one person that every sailor knew, and he was soon adopted as an informal messenger and mascot. I left with sincere regret, wrote Carnegie. Undoubtedly, Andrew was the only passenger aboard who held to that sentiment. The family had to endure another 3 weeks on a slow steamship to Pittsburgh, where they were met at the dock by Andrew's aunt and Uncle Hogan, relatives who had emigrated 10 years before. The family settled in Slabtown, a slum in Allegheny, a few miles outside Pittsburgh. Will borrowed a hand loom from his brother-in-law. Finding no commercial buyers, he had to lure himself to peddling tablecloths door to door. The returns were meager in the extreme, wrote Carnegie. Margaret, the indomitable survivor, obtained work sewing shoes for $4 a week. There was no keeping her down. Carnegie wrote admiringly. Gradually, she replaced Will as Carnegie's central hero. Will Carnegie's wife and son clearly thought him a failure. According to biographer Harold Livesey, he could no longer provide for his family's most basic needs. The $4 a week his mother earned was not sufficient to keep them alive. The family needed at least $7.50 a week to eat. There was no question. The 13-year-old Andrew would have to work. He obtained a job in a textile factory as a bobbin boy for $1.20 a week. It was a hard life, Carnegie recalled. He arrived before daybreak and left after sunset, working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Hard as it was better than the alternative. The prospect of want had become to me a frightful nightmare. To Andrew, who had always looked at the bright side, the cloud had a silver lining, as it gave me the feeling that I was doing something for my world. our family. Andrew found freedom from drudgery and books. He traces this to the generosity of a Colonel Anderson, who opened up his personal library free of charge to working boys. The windows were opened in the walls of my dungeon through which the light of knowledge streamed in. Every day's toil and even the long hours of night service were lightened by the book which I carried about with me. Having a book in his pocket gave Carnegie hope. When the library narrowed the definition of working boys to include only apprentices, Andrew wrote a letter to the Pittsburgh Dispatch urging we should not be excluded, and the definition was changed. With little formal education, Carnegie became an autodidact. Colonel Anderson's library launched a lifetime of learning. One day, Uncle Hogan was playing checkers with the manager of the Pittsburgh Telegraph office, who mentioned that they needed a messenger. Hogan suggested his young nephew for the job. Although Will worried about his son walking alone to Pittsburgh, Andy jumped at the chance. Carnegie's excitement was understandable. It gave him a desperately needed raise in pay to $250 a week and got him out of the dreaded factory. It also placed him, albeit at the lowest level, conveniently at the nexus of business and progress in a young Pittsburgh, then America's gateway to the West. Carnegie claimed that he knew, then and there, that his job as a messenger was the beginning of bigger things. I was lifted in paradise, yes, heaven as it seemed to me. I felt that my foot was upon the ladder and that I was bound to climb. His ascent fell predestined. One of his fellow messengers recalled that Carnegie's mind seemed to be towards bigger things. Carnegie's ambition was gargantuan from the start. Carnegie hurled himself into his messenger job with enthusiastic abandon. To better discharge his duties, he spent his evenings memorizing every street, every firm, and every businessman in Pittsburgh. His hustle paid off. One day, when distributing the monthly pay to the messenger boys, the boss pushed past Carnegie as if he were not going to be paid. Carnegie panicked, fearing he had made a terrible mistake and lost his job. Instead, the boss put him aside after the other messengers went home to tell him that he was worth more than the other boys. He gave him a $2.25 a month raise to $13.50 and assigned him the additional responsibility of managing incoming messages. He was now earning almost half of the $30 required monthly for their family to live with reasonable comfort. Carnegie ran the 2 miles home without stopping. He managed to keep his secret for an entire night, confiding only in his younger brother Tom as they went to sleep. I sketched to him how we would go into business together, that the firm of Carnegie's brothers would be a great one, and that father and mother should yet ride in their carriage. The next morning, when he produced the extra money, his parents were astounded. On Sunday morning, with father, mother, and Tom at breakfast, I produced the extra $2.25. Their surprise was great, and it took some moments for them to grasp the situation, but it soon dawned on them. Then father's glance of loving pride and mother's blazing eyes, soon wet with tears, told their feeling. It was their boy's first triumph. No subsequent success or recognition of any kind ever thrilled me as this did. My whole world was moved to tears of joy. Young Andrew was finally a hero. Carnegie may have been his family's savior, but his greatest regret was that he failed to save his father. One of his final memories of his father was seeing him return by boat from another disappointing sales trip. I waited for the boat, which did not arrive till late in the evening, and went down to meet him. I remember how deeply affected I was on finding that instead of taking a cabin passage. He had resolved not to pay the price, but to go down the river as a deck passenger. I was indignant that one of so fine a nature should be compelled to travel thus. But there was comfort in saying, "Well, father, it will not be long before mother and you ride in your carriage." My father was usually shy, reserved, and keenly sensitive, very saving of praise, lest his sons might be too greatly uplifted, but when touched he lost his self-control. He was so upon this occasion and grasped my hand with a hook which I often see and can never forget. He murmured slowly, Andra, I'm proud of you. He was kindness itself, alas. He passed away soon after returning from his western tour, just as we were becoming able to give him a life of leisure and comfort. The poignant scene with his father on the dock was simultaneously one of the saddest and one of the most triumphant moments in Carnegie's private Oedipal drama. Freud claimed that every young boy competes with his father, especially for his mother's affection. Carnegie was an Oedipal victor, triumphing in both these aims. At a young age he was a success compared to his father, and is claimed to have exclusively possessed his idealized mother was rather undisguised. Perhaps someday I may be able to tell the world something of this heroine, but I doubt it. I feel her to be scared to myself and not for others to know. No one could ever really know her. I alone did that. After my father's early death, she was all my own. The dedication of my first book tells the story. It was to my favorite heroine, my mother. Being a mother's favorite has its rewards, for it observed. A man who has been the indisputable favorite of his mother keeps for life the feeling of a conqueror, that confidence of success that often induces real success. In Carnegie's inner narrative, he was born to win, and throughout his life he acted the hero he believed himself to be. On the other hand, Margaret Carnegie possessed Andy as much as he did her. His mother extracted a vow that he would not marry till she died. Carnegie's fiancée, Louise Whitfield, who was forced to endure a long secret engagement, understandably thought Carnegie's favorite heroine was the most disagreeable woman she had ever known. Carnegie finally married Louise in 1886 when he was 51, 6 months after his mother died. As satisfying as it was to surpass his father, it was devastating for Carnegie to see this man he loved, a man with one of the sweetest, purest, kindest natures I have ever known, laid low. Who had done this to his father? Manufacturers with their power looms had crushed him with their superior technology. It was a lesson Carnegie would never forget. He would become an infamously ruthless competitor who used cutting-edge technology to destroy his rivals with the ferocity of an avenging William Wallace. My Andy. Every morning, Andy went into the telegraph office early before work to sweep up. While he was there, he taught himself Morse code. Messenger boys were never allowed to touch the equipment when the line was open for business. But one day a message came in with all the operators were out. The supremely confident Andrew could contain himself no longer. He risked his job and took the message. The experience became the basis of one of his business maxims. The rising man must do something exceptional and beyond the range of his special department. He must attract attention. Attracting attention, of course, is one of the things Hypomanics do best. Instead of firing him, his boss was pleased and let him man the telegraph machine when the regular operators were on break. Not everyone welcomed the young upstart. In those days, the telegraph operator worked with a copyist who would record the patterns of dots and dashes on paper before they were decoded. Copyist Courtney Hughes resented my presumption and refused to copy for a messenger boy. Andrew then did something that astounded old Courtney, along with everybody else. I shut off the paper slip, took pencil and paper, and began taking the message by car. I shall never forget his surprise. Carney had mastered his ability to transcribe letters directly from sounds, one of only a handful of people in the country who could do so at that time. After that, there was never any difficulty between dear old Courtney Hughes and myself. James Reed, the office superintendent, recalled, though he was little, he was full of spirit. Carnegie became a full-time telegraph operator for $4 a week. The Carnegies purchased a home from Uncle Hogan for $5.50. By this point, Carnegie wrote, future millionairedom seemed to be dawning. It was obvious to Carnegie that America was a land of opportunity. In a letter to Uncle Lauder, he explained, if I had been at Dunfermline working at the loom, it's very likely I would have been a poor weaver all my days, but here, I can surely do something better than that, and if I don't, it will be my own fault, for anyone can get along in this country. Andrew's letters to Scotland were so enthusiastic that his cousin Dodd took exception and challenged him to debate America's merits. Carnegie began by mailing Dodd a copy of the Constitution and asked to see England's. We have the charter which you have been fighting for years. The reforms their relatives had struggled unsuccessfully to achieve were in successful operation here. The immigrant to America found no royal family, no established church, and no aristocracy to keep him down. Furthermore, Americans were not just politically free. Their minds had been freed from superstitious reverence for old customs. America emanated an intangible vitality, energy, and creativity that young Carnegie attributed to its youth. Everything around us is in motion, he wrote his cousin in wonder. Old England was epitomized by the lassitude of old age, while young America showed the vigor of manhood. In Carnegie's eyes, America was the utopian new world his family had fought for. Andrew worshipped his adopted country like it was a living, breathing hero, according to biographer Peter Crass. The only bad thing Carnegie could say about America was that slavery was the greatest evil in the world. He declared himself to be an ultra-abolitionist. One man trafficking in the flesh of another, and women and children lashed like cattle, sickened him. But even in the face of the great evil, he was optimistic. Something so terrible couldn't last long in such a great country. He predicted it would soon die out of its own accord. Visitors to the Atlantic and Ohio Telegraph Company couldn't help but notice the boring, hustling, white-haired Andy. One customer who noticed him was Tom Scott, regional superintendent of the Pennsylvania Railroad, the largest and most complex railroad of its day. To manage the routing of its trains, the Pennsylvania had just strung its own telegraph wire, and it needed a telegraph operator. Scott offered the job to Andy at $35 a month. This would prove to be Carnegie's big break. He was lucky to be the right young man at the right place at the right time. Railroads were among the most revolutionary technologies of the 19th century. They increasingly drove the American economy both literally and figuratively. Carnegie began with the Pennsylvania in February 1853. A year later, the company breached the Allegheny Mountains for the first time, connecting Pittsburgh to the eastern seaboard and starting a local economic boom. The journey to Pittsburgh, which had taken his family 3 weeks by boat, now required a mere 15 hours. That ought to satisfy the fastest of this fast generation, wrote the Pittsburgh Gazette. As in the telegraph office, Carnegie leaped at any opportunity to distinguish himself. One morning he came into work to find that a train had derailed, the entire system was gridlocked, and Scott was nowhere to be found. No one but the superintendent himself was permitted to give train orders, wrote Carnegie. There was good reason for this rule. An incorrect order could result in enormous property damage or even fatalities. I knew it was dismissal, disgrace, perhaps criminal punishment for me if I erred. But finally, I could not resist the temptations to plunge in, take the responsibility, give train orders, and set matters going. Death or Westminster Abbey flashed across my mind. Frantically, he rerouted trains with telegraph messages signed with his boss's initials. All was right. When Scott arrived, a virtuoso performance. In less than a year, he had achieved complete familiarity with the most sophisticated railroad operation in America. Carnegie was afraid he might be fired, but Scott was pleased and even bragged to his boss about what his white-haired Scotch devil had done. Scott promoted him and gave him a raise, and soon Carnegie was routing all the trains. Scott was only too happy to enable the rise of the young man he affectionately called My Andy. Carnegie did an outstanding job, but there was another reason Scott took him under his wing. Hypomanics have a hidden talent which is integral to their success. They have an uncanny ability to make other people feel good about themselves. Carnegie idealized Scott, hailing him as a genius. He was my great man, and all the hero worship that is inherent in youth I showered upon him. Hypomanic's energetic flattery, just one manifestation of their infectious enthusiasm, induces a state of heightened self-esteem in others, a powerful tool in securing their help. It transforms bosses into mentors and employees into disciples. The goose that lays the golden eggs. In 1856, Scott offered his protege a chance to purchase 10 shares of a package shipping company, Adams Express, for $500. For Carnegie, this was an astronomical sum. 500 cents was much nearer to my capital. I had not $50 saved for investment, but I was not going to miss the chance of becoming financially connected with my leader and great man. Carnegie claimed in his autobiography that his mother mortgaged their home, but historians believe that Scott must have lent Annie the money. Carnegie quickly saw a return on his investment in the form of a $10 dividend check. Opening that envelope was a revelation about the wonders of capitalism. I shall remember that check as long as I live. It gave me my first penny of revenue from capital, something I had not worked for with the sweat of my brow. Eureka! I cried. Here is the goose that lays the golden eggs. Andrew triumphantly displayed the check to all his friends. The effect produced upon my companions was overwhelming. None of them had imagined such an investment possible. Just like Carnegie, Scott had risen in both wealth and position through the patronage of an older man, J. Edgar Thompson, a president of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Thompson introduced Scott to a surefire way to make money. What made the pair so successful was a method of investing that is illegal today. As senior officers of the Pennsylvania Railroad, Scott and Thompson knew which companies that Pennsylvania would do business with before anyone else, as they were the men who made those decisions. So with little risk, they invested in companies they were in a position to benefit. The insider investment technique was 100% guaranteed, and there were no laws preventing it. T.T. Woodruff built the first sleeping car in 1856. When he approached Thompson and Scott about obtaining a contract from the Pennsylvania, they immediately recognized the potential of his new invention and persuaded Woodruff to form a partnership with them. Young Carnegie was once again brought along for the ride, and his fortune began with the Woodruff Sleeping Car Company in the late 1850s. For just over $1,000, he received 1/8 interest. Once again, he laid out no money of his own. He was required to come up with only $200 in cash, which he borrowed from a bank. The balance was subtracted from his dividends when the more aggressive Pullman Company absorbed Woodruff. The combined entity cornered the sleeping car market. The return on Carnegie's minimal investment was astronomical.